December the 20th, 1943. The sky above Nazi Germany. A solitary B-17 bomber struggles through the frozen atmosphere, riddled with bullet holes, engines trailing smoke, its crew barely clinging to life. Within the cockpit, a 21-year-old pilot battles desperately to maintain his crippled aircraft aloft. Below him lies enemy territory. Above him, certain death awaits. What transpires in the following moments will defy every principle we comprehend about warfare, humanity, and military honor. This is the authenticated account of two fighter pilots, one American, one German, whose extraordinary encounter would become the most remarkable demonstration of mercy ever recorded in the annals of World War II. The morning commenced as any other at Kimbolton Air Base in eastern England. Second Lieutenant Charles Charlie Brown, a 21-year-old from West Virginia, assembled with his crew as the intelligence officer drew back the curtain covering the mission map. Their designated target, Bremen, Germany, among the most formidably defended industrial centers within the Third Reich. The briefing room fell into profound silence. Bremen signified concentrated flak batteries, seasoned fighter squadrons, and a 300-mile penetration deep into hostile airspace. Charlie observed his crew of 9 men. They had completed their inaugural combat mission. Together merely 2 days prior, now they were preparing to venture into the very heart of Nazi Germany. Charles Brown was not born to warfare. He had enlisted in the United States Army Air Forces from a profound sense of patriotic obligation, not from any desire for combat. Soft-spoken and contemplative by nature, he commanded the absolute trust and confidence of his men. His co-pilot, Spencer "Pinky" Luke, had become his most trusted companion. Together with bombardier Howard Snyder, navigator Al Sadok, and the remainder of their crew, they had christened their B-17 Ye Olde Pub, a tribute to their preferred establishment back home. On this particular day, they would require every measure of fortune that such a name might bestow upon them. At precisely 0825 hours, the Wright Cyclone engines thundered to life. Ye Olde Pub lifted from the English countryside into the overcast December sky, assuming position within a formation comprising over 300 bombers proceeding eastward. The tactical plan remained straightforward yet brutally demanding: penetrate deep into German territory, deliver their ordnance upon Bremen's industrial infrastructure, and fight their way back to England. The B-17 Flying Fortress had earned its formidable designation, bristling with .50 caliber machine guns positioned at every defensive angle, engineered specifically to withstand the gauntlet of German air defenses. However, survival remained a relative concept. Statistical analysis indicated that a bomber crew's probability of completing their required 25 combat missions stood at merely 1 in 4. Meanwhile, 300 miles distant at Jever Air Base in northern Germany, Oberleutnant Franz Stigler prepared his Messerschmitt Bf 109 for combat operations. At 27 years of age, Franz had already established himself as an accomplished ace, with over 270 combat sorties recorded in his logbook. He had flown campaigns across North Africa, Sicily, and now defended the German homeland itself. With 22 confirmed aerial victories to his credit, he stood merely 1 additional kill away from earning the Ritterkreuz des Eisernen Kreuzes, the Knight's Cross of the Iron Cross, Nazi Germany's highest military decoration for valor. This day would present him with that opportunity. Yet Franz Stigler carried within him something most German fighter pilots did not possess: a profound moral code instilled by his commanding officer, who once counseled him with these words: "You follow the rules of war for yourself, not for your enemy. You fight by rules to preserve your humanity." As the American formation crossed into German airspace, the heavens erupted in violence. Black bursts of flak transformed the sky into a deadly gauntlet at 25,000 feet altitude. Razor-sharp shrapnel fragments tore through aluminum skin with devastating effect. Bombers began separating from formation, trailing smoke and flame as they spiraled earthward. Charlie maintained his grip upon the control yoke as explosions buffeted the Olde Pub. They pressed forward with unwavering determination. Bremen materialized through the haze below factories, shipyards, the strategic targets identified during their briefing. "Bomb bay doors opening," Charlie announced over the intercom. The massive bay doors beneath the aircraft swung open, exposing 4,000 pounds of high-explosive ordnance to the sub-zero atmosphere. Bombs released. The B-17 lurched upward as 4 tons of explosives separated from the aircraft toward the industrial targets below. Yet the mission remained only half completed. Now commenced the gauntlet, the prolonged flight homeward, through the full fury of the Luftwaffe fighter force. As they executed their turn westward, Charlie observed them. Small black silhouettes in the distance, rapidly enlarging. German fighters, dozens of them, diving toward the formation with the precision of predatory birds attacking wounded prey. The initial wave struck with thunderous force, 20mm cannon shells and 7.92 mm machine gun fire launched through the formation with devastating accuracy. The Olde Pub's gunners returned fire, tracer rounds crisscrossing the frozen sky. A Focke-Wulf 190 flashed past Charlie's window with such proximity that he could discern the German pilot's facial features. The tail gunner, Staff Sergeant Hugh Eckenrode, transmitted frantically over the intercom, 3 fighters approaching from 6 o'clock position. The aircraft shuddered violently as 20 mm cannon shells penetrated the fuselage structure. Then catastrophe struck. A devastating explosion tore through the bombardier's nose compartment. Charlie felt the control column jerk with violent force. "Number 2 engine sustained direct hit," Pinky shouted. Dense black smoke poured from the port inboard engine. The German fighters demonstrated no mercy. They attacked repeatedly, circling like wolves surrounding wounded prey. The bombardier's compartment absorbed a direct hit from cannon fire. Navigator Second Lieutenant Al Sadok sustained serious injuries. The nose gunner, Staff Sergeant Samuel Blackford, collapsed over his weapon, blood spreading across his electrically heated flight suit. The bull turret gunner's oxygen supply line had been severed. He was suffocating within his transparent sphere, suspended beneath the aircraft fuselage. "We are falling out of formation." These words represented every bomber crew's most profound fear. The Olde Pub, too severely damaged to maintain formation speed, began dropping behind the protective envelope of concentrated defensive firepower. Now they were isolated, a crippled bomber without the covering fire of hundreds of machine guns. Easy prey for any German fighter. Charlie struggled with the controls as they lost altitude precipitously. Descending from 27,000 feet toward the frozen German landscape below. The number 2 engine was completely destroyed. Number 4 engine was sputtering irregularly, and aviation fuel streamed from ruptured tanks in visible trails. At Chuva Air Base, Franz Stigler had just completed his morning patrol when the scramble alarm sounded once more. Additional American bomber formations were returning from the Bremen raid. He had already achieved 2 B-17 kills that morning, his 21st and 22nd confirmed victories. One additional victory would earn him the coveted Knight's Cross. Franz donned his flight suit once more and ran toward his waiting Bf-109. The Daimler-Benz engine fired immediately with its characteristic roar. Within minutes, he was climbing through the cloud layer, hunting for that final kill that would elevate him to the status of a decorated hero of the Third Reich. Franz had been a commercial Lufthansa pilot before the war, flying passenger routes across Europe. He had never harbored any desire to become a fighter pilot, but when war erupted, every able-bodied man was conscripted into service. He had learned to excel at aerial combat exceedingly so, yet he never forgot his commander's counsel: honor, humanity, never fire upon a man descending by parachute, never strafe survivors on the ground. These principles separate us from savagery. On this particular day, those words would be tested as never before in his military career. Franz identified his target at 8,000 feet altitude, a solitary B-17 limping westward, barely maintaining controlled flight. This was the opportunity he sought. His 23rd confirmed kill, the Knight's Cross. He advanced the throttle and closed distance from the bomber's rear quarter, his right hand moving toward the trigger mechanism. Standard fighter doctrine: approach from the rear blind spot, concentrate fire upon the engines, continue firing until the bomber is destroyed. Yet, as he closed to within 300 yards, Franz observed something that gave him profound pause. The B-17 was not merely damaged, it was a catastrophically destroyed aircraft somehow remaining airborne. The entire tail section had been shot to fragments. The rear gunner's position stood empty, the machine gun pointing uselessly skyward. Half the vertical stabilizer had been completely severed. The fuselage was torn open in multiple locations, revealing the aircraft's internal framework. Franz could see directly into the bomber's interior. Observe wounded crew members slumped at their stations. See the blood splattered upon the walls. This was no longer a combat aircraft. This was a flying tomb, struggling desperately to reach home. Franz maneuvered his fighter alongside, flying close formation just off the B-17's starboard wing. Inside the cockpit, Charlie Brown experienced a moment of absolute terror. A German fighter 20 feet distant, matching his airspeed precisely. This was the end. He anticipated the machine guns to open fire, for the cannon shells to tear through to the cockpit compartment. Yet no fire came. Instead, Franz turned his head toward the American bomber. His eyes met Charlie's directly. And in that extraordinary moment, everything transformed. Franz observed a young man, a terrified, wounded young pilot, who had likely misrepresented his age to enlist. He observed a crew of dying men within a dying aircraft, and he remembered his commander's fundamental counsel: you fight by rules to preserve your humanity. This was no longer combat, this was execution, and Franz Stigler would not serve as executioner. In that split second of decision, he made a choice that would define the remainder of his existence. He would not fire his weapons. Instead, he would undertake something unprecedented. In aerial warfare, he would protect them. Franz positioned his BAF 109 into a protective escort formation, flying close alongside the crippled B-17. Inside your Olde Pub, the crew struggled to comprehend what was transpiring. The waist gunner, Staff Sergeant Sandy Oredsson, maintained his machine guns trained upon the German fighter. "Should I engage?" he inquired over the intercom. Charlie, observing Franz through his side window, made an equally improbable decision. "Negative. Stand down your weapons. I believe he will not fire upon us." It defied all military logic. An American bomber flying in protective formation with a German fighter over Nazi Germany. Yet it was occurring at this very moment. The gravest danger was only beginning. As they proceeded westward toward the coastal area, they would encounter German flak battery positions. The anti-aircraft gunners would observe a bomber approaching and immediately commence firing. They would not discriminate based upon the Bf-100 109 flying escort. Franz recognized this tactical reality. He gestured emphatically toward Charlie, attempting to communicate crucial information, descend to lower altitude, remain below the flak engagement ceiling. Charlie comprehended immediately. He pushed the control yoke forward, descending to 1,000 feet, then 500 feet, skimming over the German countryside at treetop level. For approximately 20 minutes, Franz Stigler maintained protective escort for your Olde Pub across German territory. He flew with such precision that Charlie could observe every detail of the German pilot's countenance, the intense concentration, the evident concern, the unmistakable humanity. When additional German fighters appeared on the distant horizon, Franz deliberately maneuvered his Bf 109 between them and the B-17, waving them away from engagement. The other Luftwaffe pilots, visibly confused by this unusual situation, peeled away from potential attack runs. No pilot would interfere with what appeared to be an ace, protecting his claimed kill. The North Sea appeared ahead those grey waters that demarcated the boundary between enemy territory and freedom. Franz understood precisely what crossing that geographical line would signify for Charlie and his crew: survival. Yet it simultaneously meant relinquishing his night's cross opportunity, permitting an enemy bomber to escape, and potentially facing court-martial proceedings if anyone discovered his actions. He had made his decision. Honor and humanity possessed greater value than military decorations. As they reached the coastline, Franz pulled alongside one final time. He locked eyes directly with Charlie Brown. Then, with deliberate slowness, Franz raised his gloved hand to his forehead in a formal military salute, one warrior acknowledging another. Charlie, overwhelmed with emotion, returned the salute with equal formality. Franz nodded once in acknowledgement, then banked his Bf 109 sharply back towards German territory. The extraordinary encounter had concluded. Your Olde Pub was alone once more, but they were alive. They were proceeding home. Charlie directed the shattered B-17 toward England. They remained 90 miles from safety, flying on 2 severely damaged engines, with critically wounded crew members and barely sufficient fuel reserves. Every minute felt interminable. The flight engineer, Staff Sergeant Charles Pechut, worked frantically to transfer fuel from ruptured tanks to functioning ones. The radio operator attempted to raise any station on the emergency frequency. They were too low in altitude, too distant from England. No one could receive their transmissions. In the rear fuselage compartment, crew members worked desperately to preserve their dying comrades. The ball turret gunner had been extracted from his position, barely conscious from severe oxygen deprivation. The tail gunner was bleeding profusely from multiple shrapnel wounds. The bombardier remained unconscious. Staff Sergeant Pinky Luke departed his co-pilot position to render assistance, moving through the damaged fuselage with the medical kit, providing whatever care proved possible. They had received training for such scenarios, yet nothing adequately prepares one for witnessing friends dying before one's eyes. The English coastline materialized like divine intervention. Charlie aimed for the nearest available airfield, Seething, not their home base at Kimbolton, but any runway surface would suffice. He had lost all hydraulic pressure, which eliminated brakes and wing flaps. This would constitute a controlled crash, not a proper landing. He instructed the crew to assume crash positions. The landing gear contacted the runway surface violently. The B-17 bounced heavily, skidded laterally, metal screaming against concrete. Without functional brakes, they slid off the runway into the grass field, finally grinding to a halt in a cloud of torn earth and twisted metal. Ambulances raced toward the wreckage. Charlie remained seated in the cockpit, hands trembling uncontrollably, unable to comprehend their survival. The crew stumbled from the aircraft, some assisting the wounded. Ground crew personnel gathered around Olde Pub, staring in absolute disbelief. The aircraft resembled Swiss cheese. Over 400 bullet and shell holes penetrated the structure. The tail section was nearly destroyed. One engine was completely gone, two others barely attached to their mounts. By all established laws of physics and probability, this aircraft should have fallen from the sky over Germany. Yet it had not, and Charlie understood precisely why. During the standard post-mission debriefing, Charlie Brown made a decision that would trouble his conscience for decades. When intelligence officers inquired about the mission details, he mentioned the intensive fighter attacks, the catastrophic damage the casualties sustained. Yet he deliberately omitted one critical detail: the German pilot who escorted them to safety. Why this omission? Because revealing that information would place Franz Stigler in mortal danger. If German military intelligence discovered that a Luftwaffe pilot had deliberately spared an enemy bomber, Franz could face execution for treason. Therefore, Charlie maintained silence. His crew agreed unanimously. The secret would remain buried in their memories. The intelligence officers examined Olde Pub thoroughly. They could not comprehend how the aircraft had remained airborne at all, much less completed the return flight from Germany. The official damage assessment report stated, "Aircraft sustained catastrophic structural damage. Statistical probability of survival virtually impossible." Yet Charlie and his crew understood the authentic truth. Skill and fortune had maintained them aloft, but it was mercy, enemy mercy, that brought them home safely. Franz Stigler landed back at Java Air Base with his secret intact. He filed a routine patrol report. No enemy contact established. If anyone questioned why he had expended no ammunition, he could state he encountered no suitable targets. Yet Franz understood precisely what he had sacrificed. That 23rd kill would have earned him the Knight's Cross, perhaps even an audience with Reichsmarschall Göring or the Führer himself. Instead, he had chosen humanity over advancement. And he would tell no one, not his fellow pilots, not his commanding officers, not even his closest confidants. The war ground forward relentlessly. Charlie Brown completed his required 25 combat missions and eventually returned to the United States. He married, established a civilian career, but the memory of that German pilot never departed his consciousness. Who was he? Had he survived the war? These questions haunted Charlie for over 4 decades. Franz Stigler continued flying combat operations until Germany's defeat, surviving when so many of his comrades perished. He never earned his Knight's Cross. Following Germany's capitulation, he immigrated to Canada, established a new life, and attempted to consign the war to memory. Yet he never forgot that American B-17. In 1986, more than 4 decades following the encounter, Charlie Brown, now a retired lieutenant colonel, determined he must locate the German pilot. He placed an advertisement in a combat pilot's newsletter, describing the encounter in detail and inquiring if anyone possessed knowledge of a Luftwaffe pilot who had escorted an American bomber to safety. The response proved immediate and predominantly skeptical. Many veterans considered it fiction or propaganda. Yet one letter distinguished itself. It originated from Canada. It was from Franz Stigler. In 1990, Charlie Brown and Franz Stigler met face-to-face for the first time since that frozen December day in 1943. They embraced like brothers reunited after prolonged separation. The two men, once adversaries separated by war, became the closest of companions. They discovered they had resided merely 200 miles apart in North America for years without knowledge of each other's proximity. They delivered joint lectures, sharing their story of humanity persisting amid warfare. Franz explained to Charlie his decision. "I did not possess the heart to destroy those brave men. I flew beside them for a long time. They were attempting to reach home." Charlie responded, "I was not merely any bomber crew. I was the most fortunate crew in the sky that day." The two men remained inseparable companions until their deaths, Franz passing in March 2008. Charlie following in November 2008, merely months apart. Their story, buried for decades beneath the silence of war, finally emerged as one of the most profound examples of human decency during history's darkest period. This is the authenticated account that defied war itself. Two warriors who chose honor over hatred, mercy over military decoration, humanity over orders. In a world consumed by violence, they demonstrated that even in the sky above Nazi Germany, compassion could triumph over conflict. Their encounter lasted merely minutes, yet its impact resonates across generations, reminding us that even in our darkest moments, we retain the capacity to choose humanity. This is the story of Charlie Brown and Franz Stigler, the pilot who landed behind enemy lines in the hearts of all who hear their tale, saving not merely his opponent, but the very principle that honor still matters in warfare.